today's episode of Virtual Sentiments, I'm talking to Samantha Cole, a technology journalist, co-founder of 404 Media, a worker-owned tech publication, and the author of How Sex Changed the Internet and the Internet Changed Sex. The recent rise of generative AI applications has made the creation of deepfake images and videos easier than ever. Too often, however, our conversations about the ethics and politics of deepfakes and the development of policies to deal with them are severed from their pornographic origins, which Samantha Cole documented in her 2017 article for Vice News. While there's long been speculation of how deepfakes might worsen things like election-related disinformation, the technology has been used from the get-go to create non-consensual pornography, a form of harassment and abuse that goes beyond deepfakes and disproportionately harms women. Like so much of online life, deepfakes can't be understood without talking about sex, which we'll do in this episode. The stigma we have around sexuality and sex work gets in the way of understanding who is victimized by non-consensual pornography, including deepfakes, and why even well-intentioned policy solutions can still end up undermining our efforts to protect people from such sexual harassment and abuse. At the same time, on the sort of more optimistic end of the spectrum, I think that talking about sex online allows us to get at the heart of what often makes our online interactions so thrilling and enjoyable: the possibilities of experimentation and intimacy that can complement and go beyond our lives offline. While these are tricky and difficult topics, Sam talks about them not only with her incredible expertise, but also with real sensitivity and a sense of humor. I don't think we get into any kind of graphic details, but I understand if these are difficult topics for you to listen to, and if you might want to skip or save the episode for later. This was one of my absolute favorite conversations to record, and I'm so grateful to Sam for joining us. And I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed making it. Thanks so much for joining us today, Sam.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you. We've been talking about doing an episode on deepfakes for some time, and it's a topic that I've been interested in since my dissertation days. And you have some of the best work on it, and also on so many of these issues that we're interested in when we're talking about kind of digital democracy and political life. So I wanted to start us off with a conversation, starting the conversation about deepfakes. So I was wondering if you could walk us through a little bit the origins of deepfake videos and why, even though it's such a hot topic in politics, talking about concerns around elections, things like that, we should be talking about its origins as a pornographic medium.
I mean, deepfakes the topic itself feels ancient and also very new at the same time to me. They first started cropping up in late 2017. Myself and my colleagues at Motherboard at Vice, which is where we used to work before we started 404 Media, we found this guy on Reddit posting these videos that were in a forum where people were doing photoshops of like celebrities onto porn performers' bodies. So it was very like, people have been doing this with like Playboy magazines forever. It's like, it's not a new thing. It's very cut and paste style, like scrapbooking for porn. People want to see like their favorite celebrity nude. That's just the way of the world, I guess. So that's where this was happening. And what made this content different from this person, and their username was Deepfakes, which was a portmanteau of deep learning, and fake, obviously. They were making video versions of it. So it was a porn video with like Daisy Ridley's face on it or something, or, Gal Gadot, Taylor Swift, lots of different celebrities that he was doing this with. So that's what was really very different about it, because it's hard to fake video, or it was, it's not anymore. It was then. In 2017, it was something that people just weren't doing well, especially with humans and human faces. So immediately we were like, this is very big. This is a big deal. This has widespread implications beyond porn, but also for things like image-based abuse, stealing, content to create these kinds of things. So yeah, that's the origins of it. I talked to a couple of researchers who were looking at like this kind of thing coming down the line. Like researchers knew that this was coming, but hadn't really seen it play out in the wild yet.
Yeah. If I recall correctly too, what was also transformative about it was that deepfakes used open source software
Yeah.
to develop it, and that's so making it kind of more accessible to all sorts of people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what he was using was NVIDIA's. It was a similar kind of algorithm that they were developing to do driverless car technology. So you're looking at a environment and it's trying to predict and overlay what's next. Or, it's trying to create this map so that you can drive this car. So NVIDIA has very much distanced themselves from this from this use of it.
Yeah, right.
They were immediately like, please don't associate us with this, which fair. But it's open source. So like anyone was using it. And yeah, like you said, like it was open source. And that was really what made it different was he was using code that was out there already for other uses, but he was using it for his own purposes. And then people could remix it and adapt it for their own use. They could do it on their own machines. It was hard to do because you needed pretty decent computer hardware and like a little bit of knowledge, decent amount of knowledge into like machine learning and engineering. But most people have like gaming level PCs now. Like it wasn't like you needed this massive, setup to do this. So people were making it very easy. And it was kind of like it was democratizing, for lack of a better word, this sort of use of the thing. So
Yeah, so now with a generative AI, how has that been changing kind of the way that deepfakes are made, or just their proliferation?
yeah, definitely. Because so many people were immediately using it for themselves and trading tips and tricks and tools and databases, it got better really fast, which is the nature of generative AI in general. It's like, the more people working on it, the more people tweaking it, the better it gets. It learns how to create like a better end product by these adversarial uses. So if you're trying to detect a deepfake, you're teaching it how to evade that detection by nature of doing the thing. So yeah, it was getting way better really fast. It started cropping up where people were doing like bespoke services, like you could pay to have someone make a deep fake for you. And then from there, it very quickly got to apps where people were developing like web-based apps, especially because they're not beholden to the app store rules, and just kind of making it so it just got better and better to the point where instead of needing 1,000 pictures of someone's face, like high quality images of like, that's why it was celebrities at first, because people wanted to see celebrities, but also because you can take an interview clip and turn it into 1,000 pictures of someone's face. It went from that to one picture eventually. It was like, okay, now all you need is 50 pictures, all you need is 20 pictures, all you need is 3. Now it's like you can do it with an app with one photo. It's not, it doesn't look amazing, but like it looks, it looks realistic enough that it's like, yeah, it's realistic enough that it's like you could harass someone with it. And now they're, like the nudify apps are a big thing now where people are kind of like taking pictures of someone and like AI generating them nude. So yeah, they very quickly spread into something that people are able to do just like on their phone, which I think is a big leap in just a few years.
Yeah, it really reduces any kind of friction. So yeah, so you were talking about also that this problem of developing technology to detect the deep fake is itself kind of feeds into, helps people develop better and more evasive forms of deep fakes. So I also wanted to kind of get right away into that because since 2017, there was a rise in talking about it as a policy problem, as a political problem. And there's been, investments in trying to detect and prevent or stop deepfakes. But so what have you seen as a journalist in these events, and to what degree is there a possibility of a technical solution to deepfakes?
Yeah. I mean, right away, it was like within like a couple months, the Department of Defense was involved. It's
Yeah.
like, it just very quickly, it was like, oh my God, like this is actually, it was like Facebook was like pouring money into funding research around how to prevent and detect deepfakes. And we see that, it's still happening. It's still very much like this hot button issue that people want to develop around. As far as like policy, I think like a route that a lot of folks are taking is the legislative route and trying to get them prevented through the legal system, which is interesting because like quote unquote revenge porn, but like, non-consensual abuse imagery legislation is already really bad. It's not great for victims. Getting the police involved with this stuff just doesn't work. Like they just don't know what to do or care. um, so it's like there are laws that need to change for real life, like actual like videos and pictures that people don't want on the internet of explicit nature. But we're jumping straight over that to try to legislate against this technology, which doesn't make any sense and isn't going to work, in my opinion. It's great that there's like an effort and an awareness against it, but to legislate around it is really hard and also probably kind of misguided in a lot of ways. I mean, as far as like a technological solution, I don't think there's not a good one currently, and I'm not sure there can be a good one because the way things go when you're trying to put in place technological solutions for sex-based abuses online, you end up catching in that net people doing consensual sex work, people doing sex education, people just trying to talk about sexuality online get caught up in this like algorithmic net. So if you're going to say no deep fakes of any kind, it's like, well, some of them are consensual. Like some of them people are making because they have a fantasy and they want to fill it out. It's like, how do you discern what's what in that case? It's a problem that like I don't have the answer to, and maybe people who are much smarter than me as far as these solutions do. But I could go on a rant forever about like how this is a social problem and not a technological one.
Well, and that's actually exactly what I like to talk about on the podcast or just like in anything, is that I agree. I mean, I think a lot of these things that people mistake as technological problems are really social problems, and we can't separate technology from our social dynamics so easily. And so, yeah, I wanted to get, because I agree. And I think, I think almost figuring out the questions that we're trying to ask and trying to understand are maybe more important than trying to find the answers. Because like you said, I mean, sometimes the answers end up subverting or undermining the very goals that we have. And that's something I think we'll talk about more too when we talk about sort of legislation relating to sexual content online. I think that's like a very big theme. So I just wanted to dig in a little bit more though to your points about non-consensual pornography, or what was, used to be called revenge porn, or also, like we were saying, image-based abuse, or yeah. So if we fold deep fakes into this larger category of non-consensual pornography, what's interesting about that too is we actually have kind of a longer history of that beyond the technological, this futuristic technology. And so some of the examples that you talked about in your book was also about, I hadn't known about this, that Marilyn Monroe had posed nude for a photographer early in her career, and she didn't think it would be, publicized anywhere, but it was published by Hugh Hefner in the first issue of Playboy without her consent. And there are similar examples too. Another example that people, talk about today is like Pamela Anderson's sex tape with Tommy Lee, which was actually, private home video that was stolen from them, also published online without their consent. And so if we kind of contextualize it, relate these deep fakes to other examples of non-consensual pornography, like one, what are sort of the tools that people have at their disposal for dealing with these problems when they're being harassed like this? And to the points that you just brought up, the idea that these laws that are targeting deepfakes are jumping over, ignoring these other legal social issues relating to non-consensual pornography.
Yeah, I mean, as far as what people can do or like the tools that they have at their disposal, it depends on where it's being shared, for one, which is partially why, the legislation against it is tough to write and tough to do correctly, narrow enough that it doesn't affect anyone else. So right after I wrote about deepfakes, a lot of, because it was starting to spread on like social media platforms, a lot of the platforms that it was spreading on, like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and Discord and all these others, Reddit obviously, we're immediately like, we're adding new language to our terms of service that forbids any kind of like AI generated, essentially, like fake or real. It's fake or real non-consensual explicit imagery, and a lot of them had those rules in place already, as far as like, the actual like the real videos of like someone recorded something without your consent, but they got specific about AI after that. So the enforcement of that depends on the platform. Some are better than others. Twitter is awful at it, of course, especially now that it's X. um, Total cesspool when it comes to, abusive content, but it used to be better than it was, and now it's not. Facebook doesn't allow any kind of nudity, so technically they shouldn't allow it, but there is lots of abuse imagery on Facebook anyway. Same with Instagram, which is owned by Meta, which owns Facebook. Reddit's pretty good about it. Yeah. So you would just go through the process of like reporting it basically. And the process of reporting it involves going to find it yourself or, having a friend do it. But it's like, even then, it's like now you have to go tell someone else to go look at it. And these are the same problems that actual abuse imagery, like real life stuff has and always has had. It's like the onus is on the victim to go hunt it down and take care of it. Or you hire someone to do it, which costs money, or you hire a lawyer to send a bunch of letters, that costs money. So, yeah, I mean, and then, that's just talking about like the platforms that will respond to a legal threat or a takedown notice. As far as like a lot of these sites where it's just kind of running wild, independent of any platform, you can email the webmaster if they have an email on the website, which some of them do and some of them respond. But beyond that, it's like, who do you contact if this website that's based in, Australia or Serbia or something, like they're not going to be responsive to you, especially. These sites are built to spread abusive imagery of people. That's the point. So yeah, and then it's also like, this is a problem that lawyers have too. It's like, who am I suing? Like they're not like, the laws in the US don't apply in a lot of these cases. It's like they're operating somewhere else. They're hard to there's not a person there. You can sue, you can track down like the company that owns the site maybe, but even that is hard in a lot of cases. So it's a lot of effort. Like once it's out there, it's like, it's a lot of time and a lot of like emotional effort to take care of this stuff and get it off the internet.
Yeah. And do people use, I mean, in terms of, and I know, we don't need to get into the specifics of the legal dynamics, but do people rely on copyright infringement claims at times?
Some people do, especially porn performers who've had their work stolen as like the bodies of the deepfakes, and people who are like influencers, like people whose faces are involved or celebrities will invoke like, Digital Millennium Copyright Act and say, this is my original work or this is my IP. And that's the way that they do it. And there's ways to do that just even through like Google. So you could do it yourself. But again, it's like, that's a whole process. Who wants to do all that? It's like, especially if you're just like somebody whose stuff was stolen off Instagram and then your like classmates spread your deepfakes of you. It's like you don't have the resources.
No, exactly. And so I think that that's crucial. So I think it's worth kind of diving into your broader work and talking about kind of sexuality and online culture, and also bridging to flow with what we're talking about here, the idea that the flip side of trying to deal with these issues legislatively, socially, is also the way that it can negatively impact sex workers and legitimate people who are using pornography to make money. Like you said, they are people themselves who are against these images and are violated by these images too. And so, and it does strike me. So talking about how this is a social problem, to some degree, part of it is stigmatizing sex work, sexuality in general. So I think it's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah, I mean, I usually in these conversations, it's like, well, if the legal system isn't working and the technological solutions aren't working, all that we have left is like the social solutions, and those are way harder. It's like those are really hard and impossible socially. Like it's really hard. We have seen change in this, I feel like, in the last few years, at least in the last decade, where people generally have, they have the opinion that like it's not cool to do this, like it's not okay. Even just changing from like the time of like Pam and Tommy, it's like people were like, actually, the documentary about them is not even good, or like good to watch because it's exploiting something bad that happened to these people, and like the celeb leaks and things like that used to come out and everyone would go watch it. It's like now we kind of know that it's not chill to do that, even if you're curious. So I think it's like things are getting a little better, but in terms of like sex work and people who are actually affected by this, whose work it is that's being stolen and being used in this way, it's also deeply dehumanizing to have this done to your body. And the reason that people feel entitled to do that in the first place is because they don't see sex work and sex workers as being like worthy of respect, which is a massive, massive problem that affects all of us. It's not just like, oh, like people don't like porn performers. That's not my problem. It's like, this is an example of how it is your problem. It comes back around to you. Yeah, I mean, the conversation very quickly just, it was like, oh my God, like people are like, how could they do this horrible thing to these poor innocent influencers, which is true. And then also it became like a political thing, but people weren't really talking that much about, or at all, about the people whose work was stolen and their faces were literally replaced, which is messed up. So yeah, and it's like if the stigma against sex work and being seen naked or having sex or doing sex work wasn't like the worst thing that you could do or be in society, this type of harassment wouldn't really hit the way it does. It wouldn't be like ammo for these guys to use against high schoolers or whatever. It's like it wouldn't be as effective. So yeah, I think, but I don't have an answer for that either. It's like, other than like respect sex workers.
Well, I think at the very least, it requires talking about it, which, like I said, I mean, it can be frustrating how much conversations around deepfakes will be focused on the political applications rather than the everyday. There, so many people who have already experienced these violations that are treated as though it's irrelevant to the conversation when it should be kind of at the center at it. And it strikes me. So that is also, I think we can like maybe let's like take a step back in history a little bit, but only a little bit, thinking about the internet, because like everything we've just been discussing is so dark and challenging. While also, there is some hope. Like you said, I agree. There seems to be like changing social norms. Like it takes some time, but before, yeah, people used to, search for the, celebrity leaked images and things like that. Whereas now there's so much better conversation around and people, not doing that, acknowledging how wrong that is. And so That contrast, though, overall, all this contrasts with kind of the early days of the internet and a lot of more techno utopian visions of the internet, and also how the internet has kind of always been intertwined with our sexualities in very kind of compelling ways, in ways that are, they can be both harmful, but also deeply liberating and empowering. And so I guess I was sort of just interested in kind of, when you look back on the work that you've done and talking about the earlier days of the internet, what are some kind of things that stand out to you that would be, helpful for people who aren't as knowledgeable about that time in terms of, I guess even from just sort of like text-based role playing and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't around for a lot of, like, I think my first experience online on the web would have been the late 90s, and I was a kid, so I wasn't on like BBS or Usenet with the adults. Yeah, that's why it was really fun to write about, because I didn't get to experience that stuff and I so wish I had. I think it just seemed like a really interesting, fun in a lot of ways, terrifying in a lot of ways time to be thinking about technology and about the internet. So yeah, in the book, I write quite a bit about, there are a couple chapters about bulletin board systems, which were not even that, they're like pre-web. So it was before the World Wide Web was even a thing. You would dial in and you would pick up the phone and call someone and say, can I get on your service? Here's my credit card number. And then they would say, if it was like an adult only service, they would say, okay, you sound like an adult.
Yeah.
You have a credit card with you, I guess, come on in. So I learned a lot about those kind of spaces through writing this book. BBSs were really the first place where porn became something that people could access on the computer. So people were, for people who are listening who don't know what I'm talking about, it's like they would scan in images from like Playboy magazines or Hustler or whatever it was, and then put them on the BBS. Like you could email and say, hey, I want this collection, and then they would be like sent to you. The files would get sent to you. So there were, the names crack me up, like the names of the systems. There was SleazeNet, ThrobNet.
Oh, wow.
Pleasure Dome. I don't know if we're getting too scandalous here, but these are, it's like such a funny.
Yeah.
And then these are where a lot of the very early porn entrepreneurs started. So they would have a BBS that was really successful and people were paying for it. But then it was like, okay, we actually have to we have to start charging more, and we have to like get on this thing that is the web so that people can actually see these images, and also it's way more accessible. So a lot of folks would go from being a BBS operator to being like a pornographer themselves, or being like being a webmaster for a website. So I think people used it primarily, like the majority of people were probably using it to consume content. A lot of people were using it to like experiment with their own sexuality in like an exhibitionist kind of way. Like, here's my homemade, like scanned in photos that I own. But yeah, and then on Usenet, which is also text based, people were doing something similar, but it was a lot of just like topic talk. So they would be talking about like sexuality and, learning about, a lot of it was like harm reduction. So they were learning about like access to resources. And then, like you said, like their role playing, I think, was possibly my favorite of all of these favorite things.
Yeah.
So people on MUDs, which is multi-user domains, it was text-based, like real-time chatting. So they would build like a world where you could interact, kind of like I would say like Oregon Trail was like a MUD in a way, but without the other people. It's like this object-oriented world where you could say turns left and sees a chair, and then it says like the room is over here. So yeah, it was people doing a lot of like role playing in those as genders and sexualities that they weren't in real life, which I think is really fun and cool. It's like they didn't feel like out in real life, but they could do it in these like role playing games essentially.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that because I'm very interested in anonymity and kind of the way, and so I think it's so. What I also really appreciated about it, and what really resonated with me about it was that the way that you talked about how these interactions, like this sort of concealed and an anonymous way of interacting with other people, was sort of a way to explore ourselves, and then also people were developing truly intimate relationships, and partly yes, if they were younger, you have a lot of emotions as a young person, a lot of hormones raging. But also if you're not, I mean, just being online, like we think of it as not a visceral experience, but in reality it can often be like almost your heart can race, if you're angry or excited. You can have these kind of deep feelings, even though you're just interacting on a screen.
Yeah, for 100%. Yeah. And I think there's Sherry Turkle has done a lot of research on this if people want to follow up, but like, it's just so interesting to kind of see how like the disembodied experience of like chatting with someone in this world that is totally in your head, like it's completely in your imagination. Not even people get lost in like World of Warcraft and stuff like that nowadays, but even that has like a visual element. This was totally like imagined. So if someone's like, I am a 10-foot dragon with giant breasts, they would be like, I can picture that in my mind, but it was just text. And so it was this I think it was more powerful even than having the visual, because you are 100% creating it in your own head. I mean, this is not like a novel idea. It's like, this is why a lot of people like the book better than the movie. It's like, it's all kind of emotional in yourself. But I think and it's something that still happens. Like, I mean, being a teenager on the early internet, being on forums, it's like I made very strong connections with people that I have never met and never even saw a picture of. And I think that's like a running joke right now. It's like, I was like, why was I as an 11-year-old like helping this woman through her divorce on,
Yeah.
forums?
Yeah.
It's like, that's just how it was in like the late 90s and early 2000s. It's like, that's kind of the way it was. And like, it was fine. Like, it was okay. No one, no one was hurt in the process. I mean, probably some people were, but like, it was mostly okay because it stayed in that world and it was text based. And yeah, it was people made really strong connections. There's a story that's in the book that I talked to Richard Bartle, who is, one of the very influential early internet, pioneers. But he had a really great story about how him and his friends met this woman through like, it was either Usenet or BBS, or maybe it was a Mud. I don't know. It was one of these like early, like the Mud type text-based places. And one of his buddies, like they were, young guys, like fell in love with this woman that they thought was also like a young woman, and just fully like head over heels, like was going to propose over the course of like talking to her for weeks, sending letters, blah, blah, blah. And like they all thought that she was like a part of their group. And then she stopped responding and they were like, well, we have her address. Like, we should just go knock on her door. Again, this is the 90s. I think things were different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not something I would recommend doing, but and who answered the door was this user's wife. And she was like, oh, you've been talking to my husband who's like now like, being charged for like tax evasion or something.
Yeah.
Like, that's why he
Yeah.
disappeared. And it's like, oh my God, like you got catfished on a text-based forum. Like, that's intense. I don't know. It's like a goofy, it's not great for anyone involved, but like, I think they learned their lesson.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it was a very like a very early time to experience something like that. Like, it's not like now, we've come to kind of make jokes about it, but that wasn't going to be obvious.
And it's still a problem. It's like, still people send money to scammers on Facebook, having not met them. They fall for romance scams all the time. It's like these problems that were problems 30 years ago are still very much human problems.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, and so kind of what I think is also, so there's both sort of, that sort of organic exploration, but then also I think history of kind of maybe the adult industry more broadly, and then the sort of rise of pornography as a business, something that online specifically, I was really struck by the fact that in the history of the internet, there were these moments of sex workers kind of being their own webmasters and running these sites. And so there's this independence, freelancing, ownership that people had, but then also people kind of pretending to be doing the same thing. We're just talking about this catfishing, but like pretending to be sex workers who are in charge of their websites and then trying to make money in that way. And then also just sort of more broadly, this sort of development of all of the adult industry online, it kind of, you argue, influenced the business of the internet, digital advertising. So I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through some of that.
The early webmasters of porn were largely like the successful ones were women. So you had like Danny's hard drive, which was like massive. And she had a huge business based on like her own work. And then she had like her friends who were also in on it. So what you had was like people basically being like, I'm going to cash in on this because obviously this is what people want. So porn has always been very adaptive and like reactive to what people want in a very quick way. So if you're not going to like give people what they want immediately, you're dead. Like your business is not going to make it. So, it's very instant gratification type industry. And people in the business knew that, and they were like, we have to develop faster and better than anyone else on the internet right now. And there weren't a ton of people on the internet in general, a ton of other businesses. So they kind of were shaping the way that it was going to go from the start. So yeah, things like, I mean, a lot of it is like crumbling or lost history. So it's like debatable what was attributed to who. But I mean, we can pretty much say that like things like tracking, like cookies and things like that were very much like pioneered by porn businesses. Things like affiliate links, which link sites in the early web were huge business because you could just have a site and there wasn't really like a search engine that everyone went to. So you had to know where to go to find the rest of the internet. So you would go to a link site about the Grateful Dead and be like, here's all the great Grateful Dead fan pages. Or you could go to a site that's like, here's all the great porn pages. And there were a few of those, and a few of them were really successful. But you would just have like a site that is just links, categorized maybe, and the links were affiliate links. So, the person doing the directory was making a cut. The people who owned the website that it was linking to were getting the benefit of new subscribers. It's like this is something that like runs the internet today, is like affiliate linking. And same with advertising. It's like that's the banner ad was massively popular with porn sites because it was the same kind of idea. It was like, we give you this great rate on an ad, put it on your site, it'll go to other porn sites, and then everybody takes a cut of this. So it was very much popularized, if not invented by, some of these people in the porn industry. It was made better by them, certainly. Yeah, these are the things that drive the internet, which is ironic considering how sex is being pushed off of the internet at every turn. It's like, this is like why Amazon is huge because of some of these technologies. And then, at the same time, it's like, you can't say sex on TikTok.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. That was the other thing I wanted to ask about, because it's so different from the way the internet works now. And also sort of more broadly, like toward the end of like, if to some degree, part of what we need to be dealing with is destigmatizing sex work. Also talking about the way that sex workers who are doing things legally online are discriminated against financially, and also just all the challenges we've had in terms of the policies shaping the internet, like Section 230 and then FOSTA and SESTA, which have the intentions of reducing sex trafficking, but actually end up undermining those goals. And so kind of, I think that's something we need to kind of get into too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, this is like panic about the wrong demographics seeing the wrong thing on the internet has always been a feature of discourse around the internet. It's like this started with like, in the early 2000s and in the 90s, talking about like the Communications Decency Act, where that was a big fight where it was like, are children accessing porn when they shouldn't be, when they are on the internet. But, the result of that was Section 230, which is the reason why the internet arguably is what it is today. It's like it makes sites not liable for the things people do and say on their platforms. So, the classic example that everyone uses is like, if I'm on Yelp and I say this restaurant sucks, no one can sue Yelp for my words, my
Yeah.
defamation of
Yeah.
this restaurant.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not something that would happen anyway, probably legally, but
Yeah, but there would be other cases of
people would try it.
Yeah, exactly.
There would be a restaurant that would try it. So, what you have, the version of that that's happening today is we had, like you said, like FOSTA SESTA, which amended Section 230 to say sites are liable for any kind of like sexual, like sex trafficking or harms of that nature from, these sites. So if you say you're going to meet up in like an escort kind of way on some of these sites that are trying to abide by FOSTA SESTA, you're banned, or the site gets, people go after it legally. So, at that point it's breaking the law. So the result of that is these sites were just like, no more sex. Like we can't deal with it. A lot of the really small sites were like, no more porn, no more talking about sex. Like, it's just, if the law is that broad, we can't risk it. And that's kind of what we were talking about with deepfakes, where like the intention of like, no one wants trafficking on the internet. Obviously, that's a really horrible thing that does happen, but it's so broad, and it didn't consider consensual sex work as consensual sex work to begin with. It was like, this is all exploitation. So we're just going to, take that as casualties and see what happens. And like, what happens is like, we get, Craigslist, like whole sections of that meetup, parts of that site got taken down. People lose their income and their ability to do like consensual sex work through the internet because they can't talk about anything anymore without getting banned, or without the site being liable. We have legislation happening now where it's like the age verification stuff is also very scary, where people are trying to push through like forcing everyone to show ID for a site that is like a certain percent sexual. Yeah, it's just like, it's like whiplash going in the other direction. Like, it used to be this kind of free Wild West type stuff, and now it's like, now we're not going to be able to say and do anything.
Yeah, no, and that was also like, what's difficult about it too is that so much of the internet was enabling people to better vet their clients and also warn each other about dangerous people and situations, and also, having people talking about sex online also enabled investigations into potential cases of sex trafficking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the big one would be Backpage, which went down like right before FOSTA SESTA passed, which, so it didn't even really need that law for feds to go after it. But, there are documents showing that like investigators were working with Backpage, and Backpage was working with them to find trafficking victims, because that's where they would post. Like, that's where the traffickers would post their ads. So that's where they found them. And now it's all pushed more underground. Backpage is gone. Lots of people can't use Backpage that they did previously because, this like anti-sex narrative that FOSTA SESTA was riding on. And yeah, like you said, like the harm reduction thing is a huge part of it. People were using the internet to be safe in a criminalized industry, to talk about, who to avoid, like how to, like, is this best practices? Like, can I meet up with someone to talk about this? And now a lot of that is gone. And that's a net negative, obviously. It's like people became less safe and more vulnerable to trafficking because of this anti-trafficking, like quote unquote, bill.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I think that that's very helpful to know, and something that isn't, you wouldn't necessarily have, I guess, seen if you're outside of these issues. I don't think it's something that was talked about when these bills were passed. They were treated very straightforwardly, good, without any kind of potential unintended bad consequences like this. Yeah. So and so then I wanted to talk a little bit about, so in that same vein, sort of the reliance of sex workers on cryptocurrency to some degree, and sort of the challenges again. And this again can include, people who are creating, like, who are cam models or creating legal pornography. So even where it's not criminalized, there's all these hurdles and issues that people face.
Yeah. Crypto crypto's a funny one because it had this big bust and boom and bust and boom.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to be clear. I'm very skeptical. I have some problems
Yeah.
with crypto, but I do feel like I have to, you got to hand it to them sometimes when it
For sure. Yeah, I mean that's the thing is like it was used by sex workers in a lot of ways. And the reason it was used was because even though porn is legal work and being an OnlyFans model is completely legal, banks and financial institutions and payment processors do not play fair or friendly with it. So a lot of people, like, you can't say, people do like jokes and stuff on Venmo. You can't really do that to a point without getting banned. So, and there, a lot of these platforms will ban you even if you don't have, comments or sexual things in the notes or whatever, because they've put together from your other social profiles or, their other knowledge about you that you're a sex worker. So you're banned. Banks getting debanked is a huge problem. As someone in the adult industry, if you are using like a traditional bank, you really run the risk of being shut down, which is like a crazy, crazy thing that I think a lot of people don't really realize is happening. It's like these institutions, these private institutions are making moral judgments about customers. And the reason is like, porn is like quote unquote high risk in the same way that like gambling is. Like that's how they categorize it because of all the chargebacks and things like that. But at the same time, it's like, it doesn't really matter how above board you are with your work. Like you can still get debanked. So yeah, I mean the reason people turned to crypto a couple years ago in like a really big way was because banks were not doing it. They were just not, they were not working out. And crypto promised, anonymous transactions, like quote unquote anonymous, even though
not
a lot of it's
really.
really like not that anonymous.
Yeah, no. Pseudonymous to some degree, but
Yeah.
anything like that can be
Right. Yeah. Someone could track you down. So it was, these less public transactions. And then also you didn't have to rely on a bank to do these transactions. But at some point, a bank has to enter the equation to get that, to turn that money into rent money. Nobody's landlord's taking Bitcoin that I know of. Probably somebody's is. But yeah, so that was kind of like why there was a huge moment where sex workers were like, we want to get into crypto. We want to make it a big thing because maybe it's the future of how we don't get discriminated against in that way. Maybe we can survive from this. I think like, crypto in general has had ups and downs and like it's kind of way down as far as like the people using it and then also like the popularity and just like literally its value. So it's less of a thing now. But it's still like, it's an interesting case study, I guess. It's like, it showed a need, and it showed very much that people need an alternative or need to stop being discriminated against. Like one or the other needs to happen so that people can survive. And it's like, if crypto can't do it, something needs to change.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree. And I think that that's also like, it illustrates the need. It also, I mean, I think to some degree it illustrates why the precarity of crypto is such a problem because it's, there are people, it can be useful for precisely vulnerable populations, but it's that vulnerability that then makes the volatility of crypto so such a problem. Yeah. I wanted to kind of, because I think what's interesting is now also all this kind of future, like outwardly looking ways of thinking about the internet. So, people trying to make the metaverse happen. Mark Zuckerberg, I guess, in particular, trying to make the metaverse happen. But the idea of like having more virtual reality and these interactions, kind of what can we, are there lessons that we can draw from the past of the internet in terms of how we can see? Because it seems to me like I think a lot of the VR stuff that exists, both like that's being developed by major companies, is very sexless in certain ways. And so I guess I wonder, I mean, is that to some degree always going to be limiting in terms of how much uptake it's going to have?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think with VR, like the only real things that were ever successful with VR and still are successful have been gaming and porn. And if you can't, it's like the Apple Vision Pro doesn't have like the ability to do porn on it in like a easy way. Like you really have to kind of work around it because it's an Apple product and because Apple famously hates all things sex and because that's the way everything is going. So, and like, yeah, like you said, like the metaverse, it's like people have always wanted this connection with other people. And if you look at like VR chat, for example, it's like there are worlds of VR chat that are just like sex clubs. Like it's just what people do. And then there are also worlds where people just like talk and interact and like are free to talk about whatever. And once you start imposing these sort of rules and regulations around like what people can and can't say morally, I think things just get less interesting. Yeah, it's people find it less appealing. You don't get to have that same kind of connection with someone else when you're banned and dinged for saying like very normal things, talking about sex, whatever it is. So yeah, I think that's a big reason why it's the hardware for sure. It's like people don't really want to spend all day in a sweaty headset in general. That's never been the that's never been the reality. Like, I think even if there was, even people who use like headsets for porn are not spending all day doing that. And it's like these companies want you to spend all day doing it. They want you to spend your life in the metaverse. And the really successful metaverses that exists, like Second Life, and then more recently VR Chat. Like you can have that freedom of making that connection with someone if you want to. And I think that's coming from a place that makes it successful just from like a ethos standpoint. It's not like that's the only reason people go to these places. It represents like a more general openness toward lots of experiences, which is like the point. It's like you don't want to go to the metaverse and be alone. That's not really fun. I've done that and it sucks. It's like this is boring as shit. So yeah, I mean I think that's a big reason why these things don't take off. It's just more of like a spiritual problem. They need to like relax, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, it's exactly like we were talking about in the beginning of the conversation, even with deep fakes, and also like the sort of problems of the internet is that we can sometimes try to like siphon, we imagine it as something, we talk in terms of like in real life versus online or online offline. And in reality, we really can't, everything's so intertwined. And also same with like the way that we talk about sex and any other aspect of our lives or politics. All these are intertwined as well. And so like it strikes me that Second Life and the VR chat that you're describing, and like then going back to those text-based chats, the thing that's also I think difficult to talk about with deepfake videos is just like a more like a broader, I don't want to say like a broader philosophical problem, which is that like we like to fantasize and we like to invent ourselves and we like form connections with people that can be simultaneously very authentic, and also like, having elements of performance or deception or secrecy or again just like experimentation. And so like the what's so I think always thrilling about the internet has been that side of it. But I think that's also like very much at odds with a lot of like assumptions that we have about, how we're supposed to behave with each other.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, and that's, I mean, the idea, the selling point of the internet in the early days was like, this is utopia. You can be whoever you want. You can experiment however you want. Which, like, very quickly people realized that, like, oh, people just want to be like the same type of person online as they were.
Yeah, people were kind of, there are all these sort of prejudiced beauty ideals that we have that people would tend to.
Yeah, people immediately were just like, I'm going to replicate real life into the virtual. But it's like this idea, that's why it kind of worked. It's like it is very appealing. You can be a different self. You can experiment, and like you said, like you can show as much or as little of yourself as you want. And I think that is like an idea, and it's at odds with the way the internet is being built today, because the internet is being built today with like profit minded, like venture capital in mind. It's like we're investors are counting on your identity being profitable to their product. So it's like if we can't sell you something in real life, that's a problem. That's a problem for these platforms. So, it's like there's not a lot of profit in being like, a fantasy dragon
Yeah.
in a text-based world.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to
Yeah.
be, they want you to be your demographical self, so that they can sell to you, which is just, and, at the same time, they want to be able to advertise to you and sell to you. So they don't want any of the sex involved. Yeah. So it's not appealing to people. That's not a world people want to live in general.
Yeah. Well, and there's such, again, like what I love about the book too is there's all these contrasts between like the internet that we have now. I mean, not that there aren't. So I was going to get into like, so, the early days of harm reduction and also LGBTQ communities being able to meet each other, people learn about each other and and connect online versus today. We still have a lot of that, but at the same time, when you look at something like the Dobbs decision, you also have all this increased risk with the fact that, because everybody's tracking everybody and trying to sell products using data, and that data can be bought and sold by pretty much anyone. That means that anonymity that was originally so liberating is, just basically impossible, and it's almost it is the opposite. There these heavily surveillance based business practices.
Yeah, yeah. The surveillance is maybe like the number one thing that's like killing the internet or killing people's experience of it.
Yeah, the internet is like a cultural phenomenon and like social place.
Yeah, surveillance of like literally, like you said, like, police getting access to your period tracking app data is a very real thing. Depending on the app, depending on the state. And if the threat is like I need to connect with my community, but I have to put so much mental effort and mental load into like what words I can and can't say in order to stay on this platform where I have my community. It's just not effort that people are going to go to a lot of the time. A lot of people do, a lot of people still do, but like it's just like oppressive and taxing, and it takes away from like the idea of like this being a free open internet. It's like this is actually, this is like cop central if we're all being watched all the time. So yeah, it's the surveillance stuff is really, it's really scary, especially like I said with the Dobbs decision and post Roe. It's like, it's very scary.
Yeah. Well, and I do wonder, do you think that is there like a flexibility to the internet insofar as, sure, we have all these dominant social media platforms that do make it harder for people to talk about sex, to, explore all these multifaceted parts of our lives together. But is there a way that, the web more broadly, like people can, develop their own communities online that, allows for the possibility of kind of pushing back against all these types of trends and centralization of power and conformity?
I think so. I mean, there's been some, like, as frustrating as like the fragmentation of social media has been, it's been interesting to see people experiment with that kind of thing. You have like Mastodon where people are making make very much their own spaces with their own rules. And then you have, like Blue Sky to an extent is a little bit, it's owned by the guy who owned Twitter. So I don't know how much you put into that, but like it's, people are trying these new spaces out to see what fits and what doesn't. I think there is still space for people to make their own little corners of the internet. It's getting harder and harder, but it's still happening. It's just a little bit harder to find.
Yeah. And it actually kind of reminds me of, I did want to talk to you a little bit about 404 Media and what you've co-founded, a worker owned publication. Cause I feel like in a way that's its own, I think, example of you guys kind of building your own community and pushing back against these broader political, economic, concentration of power and problems. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind reflecting on that experience a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, 44 Media, for people who don't know, it's four journalists, myself and three others who used to work at Vice Media at Motherboard. Yeah. So we left Vice at a time in journalism in general and at Vice especially. It was like things are just not looking good. The media corporate like atmosphere is just really bleak. Layoffs are happening every day. I think it was like 500 layoffs in media in January alone, which is nuts. So, we kind of looked around and we were like, I don't think that this is gonna last, or it's not a fun or sustainable or interesting way to do media, to do journalism, is to have this like insane amount of overhead that these companies have, these offices, and they're making people come into in the most expensive neighborhoods in New York City. They have these investors that they have all of this debt to that they need to pay back. The CEOs and the executives of these companies are taking massive, massive, massive paychecks and bonuses at a time when their companies are failing, which is a concept I don't really understand. So yeah, it was kind of like, we can probably do it better. And if we can't, we should at least try. So, we left, we started our own company that's doing a lot of the same reporting that we were doing at Motherboards, tech and science and all that good stuff. Everything we've talked about here today. And we're doing it in like a subscriber first model. So it's funded by people who want to read it. And there's no overhead because it's just us, on our laptops. The overhead is like our rent,
Yeah.
our internet bill. So we built it on Ghost, which is an open source CMS. Yeah, and then we've been relying very heavily on a lot of our friends who help us through this whole process. And yeah, readers pay for what they want to see, and so far people are happy with it. It's been really cool to do it that way. It's very straightforward sort of way to run a media company and do journalism. It's like, this is the stuff that's important to our readers, so this is what we're going to do. And so far it's working. I mean, it's only been, I guess it'll be 6 months soon. So it hasn't been very long, but it's been really fun to see it happen in that way, to be like, okay, this is something to be optimistic about in an industry that is crumbling before our
Yeah.
eyes.
Yeah. I mean, it is very hard structurally what's going on with journalism, and that's been kind of part of the story of the internet. And so, but I do think I'm grateful for, the way that, you guys are doing something new, and it's very cool. And it does illustrate, using open source, and then being able to kind of it just reminds me a little bit of like the techno utopianism of the internet to some degree. Like it's like you can, I mean, again, it's early days, but for you guys, but it's just like, I don't know. I guess it's important to find some like hope in the darkness, especially because like we were saying, like a lot of these issues can't really be technically fixed. The legal solutions haven't been great or are going to be difficult no matter what you do. And even the social ones are difficult, but it's like the sort of constant kind of pushing back and redevelopment and experimentation. It feels like the main way to kind of, it's also like something that's like to some degree in our control or feels like it can be if we like collectively organize with other people to do it.
Exactly. That's the thing is like, it's like this company is in our control, whether it succeeds or not is in our control and also in other people, like our readers' control. It's not the whims of some executive who's looking at a spreadsheet and saying, this isn't profitable enough. It's like, we decide how this goes to an extent.
Yeah. And you can be like directly responsive to your subscribers.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was spent the morning like answering emails from people who replied about a story that I wrote. It's like, it's good vibes to do it this way. It's very refreshing. It's like, I don't have to wake up and wonder if I'm getting laid off tomorrow is really the big, it's like, no one's going to lay me off but me and my co-founder.
Yeah. That sounds like a better situation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Healthier at least.
Yeah. Easier to cope with, I think.
Yes, definitely.
Well, I really thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I've learned a lot and I love learning from you. So really meant a lot that you took the time to talk to us.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been super fun. I could talk for hours about this stuff. So.
I absolutely loved talking to and learning from Sam. There's a few points that I just wanted to emphasize and reflect on further before we wrap up the episode. We talked about the origins and the democratized nature of current deepfake technology. The name even comes from a Reddit user who posted the original deepfake pornographic video using open source tools. While people have long been creating and photoshopping similar images, the recent shift has been not only technological, in terms of the quality of videos and the reduced amount of images needed to edit a video. The major shift in 2017 and since then has also been about the ease with which just about anyone can create deepfakes. Talking about the problems of deepfakes with respect to harassment and non-consensual pornography is crucial for anyone interested in policy solutions. As Sam highlighted, a lot of the government funding and legislative action targets deepfake technology and not non-consensual pornography. Victims of non-consensual pornography have little recourse, relying on platform-specific policies and lawsuits. Porn performers whose likenesses are used to victimize others without their consent have drawn on the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. By centering sex and sex work, we can also better appreciate why technical solutions would not be able to differentiate between non-consensual and consensual deepfakes. When companies ban nudity or sexual content, that's one way out, but this importantly comes at the cost of further stigmatizing sex. Talking about sex and intimacy and the possibilities of experimentation and exploration online is really essential to dealing with the harms that we're concerned with, things like harassment and abuse. That we carry so much stigma and shame around sex further contributes to the inherently degrading and violating experience of non-consensual pornography, whether deepfake or otherwise. While the internet has contributed so much to our lives, the surveillance inherent to online interactions can get in the way of our ability to enjoy it. As Sam highlighted, since Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, tech companies have been unclear whether and to what extent they would share data relating to people's reproductive health care. The business of data brokerage means that in many states, police and other government actors need only to legally purchase massive amounts of data from private companies to build criminal cases without warrants. When we talk about the harms of things like digital surveillance or non-consensual pornography, we aren't just talking about how they may directly threaten us, but also what they make us miss out on. Digital advertising incentivizes the collection of demographic data that can be matched to particular individuals. This is completely at odds with what drew people online in the internet's early days and why we still go on today, seeking experimentation and intimacy, including with anonymity. We talked about some problems with solutions proposed for dealing with sex online. Sam's work highlights how legislation has often ignored the insights and agency of sex workers. When policies make it harder for sex workers to communicate online, it becomes harder for them to keep themselves and each other safe, and for them and investigators to find examples of horrors like trafficking. Those who are skeptical of political solutions often tout entrepreneurial innovation. But there are also issues with these solutions as well. For example, we also discussed the financial discrimination that sex workers face, including when they do things legal and above board. While they have used cryptocurrency, the precarity of the value of crypto makes it an unreliable solution that can exacerbate financial vulnerability. Additionally, the pseudonymity rather than anonymity of crypto means that it, like many digital interactions, can technically be traced back to an individual. There's still nothing like good old-fashioned cash for those hoping to maintain privacy in their financial transactions, though of course that comes at a cost. I think Sam and I have found some consolation in the fact that we've seen social norms change over time, just in the short years since the development of online life. Something that we should always remember is that the dynamics of our lives online are fairly new. This is a fairly new experience for human beings to be dealing with when we take a long view of our history. I think we are still developing social norms about how to interact online, about things like consuming nonconsensual pornography and doxing. But while I think there's been some progress since some years ago, I don't think we can take this progress for granted or assume things will only get better from here. I do think, however, that if we are going to progress, then we're going to need to be able to talk frankly and with vulnerability. I also think that figuring out how to make online spaces that help us do that, including with anonymity, will be essential. Thanks for listening. Till next time.